go. Okay. Okay. Great. So, what I would suggest is that if we keep our ourselves on mute, that will help us not be interrupted as Paul is speaking with us tonight. And I know you're going to have a lot of questions. And so, and that's fine. So if you could put those in the chat, I think what we'll do is I can help monitor those. And then if we have the time, I would rather you ask your question than have me read it off. So let's see how many questions we get and how we can do that in a time efficient manner. And we'll also want to make sure that we get into the part of the meeting tonight where we talk about the Action Network. It's kind of like one big flow, but I want to make sure as we leave you tonight, you know where to go to sign up for the Action Network and why that's important. So that's our agenda. So, so thank you all for being here again and Happy New Year if you're just arriving and you haven't heard me say that yet. Tonight we're going to hear from Paul Blackburn, whom many of you have met on some of these calls in the past. In fact, we had, I think, our very first webinar, Paul. You may remember this. How many, gosh, we were brand new. And you launched our Coalition to Stop CO2 Pipelines with a webinar on CO2 pipelines in general. You and John Albers way back in the day when we were just starting to get going. And the reason we got connected to you was because of our friend Rick Stuckey, who's on the call tonight. Rick, I don't know where the heck you are. But let's make sure we say thank you to you as well, because without your connections, we may have never known about Paul and Bold Alliance. One thing I want to say about Paul that I've experienced is that he is not just an expert, and I don't know anybody else that is in this movement that knows as much as he does about 45Q, CO2 pipelines, pipeline safety, and pipelines in general. Uh, but he takes that knowledge and packages it in a way that we can understand it and we can use it and we can use it with confidence. And he also is extremely giving with his time. So there hasn't been a time where I've reached out to Paul and he's ignored me or said no. Now that may come in the future. I don't know if I've overstayed my welcome, but he's always there and always said sure. And in fact, sure to the point where he has helped us craft the information on CO2 pipelines that went into the regulatory bill that we have. We ran it by Paul, got his input. He is willing to work with us in giving his input and review on local bans for sequestration that are not just in the aquifer over the Muhammad Aquifer, but also in other locations. So he's willing to do that as well. He's willing to do about anything we ask. And I just want to thank you, Paul, because without you, I don't know where the heck we would be in the progress that we've made because we've learned a lot, we've shared a lot, and we've had the benefit of your expertise along the way. So, anyway, and we're glad you're here with us tonight because you are, I believe, the utmost expert on 45Q. And by putting that expertise in context to what we're going to ask people to do tonight, I think we can launch something together that's really good. So, with that, I am going to just say, it's up to you. You take it away from here. And I would think if we go till say maybe 7:50 and then we'll do a time check, then we can take questions. And if that includes the stuff on the Action Network, fine. If it doesn't yet, we'll make sure we get to it before we go. This meeting goes till 8:15. We typically go till 8:15 and often actually extend it if we need to. So we've got plenty of time. Does that sound okay to you? Okay.
Yeah, yep, Pam, and thanks very much for your gracious introduction. And I have to say how impressed I am with all the activism in Illinois and how much in other states too, but how much has been done and how much success you've had over the years. I know a while ago I asked Pam for a list of successes and it kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And it's just really impressive. So I appreciate that. Um, I'm going to try to share my screen here. So everybody pray to the gods of Microsoft that this works or Zoom or whoever the heck I need to do that. Let's see. Does that work for everybody?
Works
It
for me.
does. It's good.
You got it.
Beautiful. Got a
Great.
hatchet. A hatchet and a tree stump.
Yep. Okay. And you can see my presentation now, right? Because I can't see it. So
Oh, gee, yes, we can.
I can see it in different screens. I'm looking over here. But that's not because I'm ignoring everybody. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is the budget reconciliation process. And I call this the chopping block for 45Q. And we're going to go into a certain amount, I'm going to go into a certain amount of detail here. And some of you might care about that, some of you might not. But the key message is really pretty much the same. And I've got some emphasis in here that this is a way of chopping or reducing the 45Q tax credit. So everybody see the next slide?
I can see it.
Good. Okay. So as you probably all know, the 45Q tax credit is the most important source of funding for carbon capture storage transportation projects. And if the 45Q tax credit is eliminated from federal law, all these carbon capture pipelines will just simply disappear because there won't be any federal funding for them. There won't be enough money to interest investors. And, just to make this perfectly clear, these are not free market pipelines. They're government projects. And that's important in the context when you're talking to legislators, because they like to say that these are private, companies doing these pipelines. And while that's true, all the financial backing, or essentially all the financial backing, is coming from the federal government. So these are federal projects, and they should be characterized that way. And in fact, this may be the biggest federal project since the construction of the interstate highway system. And yet it's flying under the radar in so many ways. But there's a huge amount of money potentially going into it, and it could have major budget impacts. So therefore, the budget reconciliation process. So what is 45Q? Well, 45Q is the section of the tax code in which the 45Q carbon capture and storage credits are found. It's a 26 USC section 45Q. Now, since it's in the tax code, only Congress can eliminate it. The president can do some things in terms of its implementation, but not that much. And the IRS has no authority to limit the tax credit. So if somebody's going to do something, it really does need to be Congress first. So, you can't just write President Trump and say, get rid of this. He can't do it. It has to go to Congress first. Okay. So, so the normal process for Congress to pass a bill, and many of you I'm sure know this, is that, at least one senator and one representative have to write a bill stating that 45Q would be struck from the tax code, and then it would move through various committees, the full Senate, House, and vote on it. And if they got agreed on everything, then they could just get rid of it or reduce it or put conditions on it or whatever. And a simple majority is needed in the House for this process, but in the Senate, there's this thing called the filibuster, which means that a single senator can just simply oppose it and talk for indefinitely. And the practical result of that is that in order to pass a bill through the House and through the Senate, you need to get a 60% vote on controversial issues. So that 60% barrier is a pretty high vote to achieve. And it does tend to freeze the government from doing things, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. But it has made budget work difficult in the past. So in 1974, Congress passed a law called the Congressional Budget Act that overrides the Senate filibuster, but only on budget issues. And this law, in theory, makes it easier to pass laws because it eliminates the filibuster option, and it allows for a simple majority in both the House and Senate. And it can relate to either cutting spending or increasing taxes or something else related to the federal budget. So that means that if one party controls both the House and Senate, they can, in theory, pass a budget resolution that cuts programs such as the 45Q program by a simple majority. And that's why the Republicans are interested in it. But there are many special rules, and I'm going to run through some of these rules, and these aren't actually the biggest hurdle, but just so for those of you who care knows about it. The way this works is that the House and Senate both have budget committees. Everything's done in committees, right? And the budget committees have to initially pass a budget resolution that sets spending targets for federal programs. But this must be budget related. It's called the Byrd rule. So they can't do something like we want to change some other aspect that doesn't have any effect on the budget. They can't do that. And then each budget committee sends this bill to other substantive committees that have expertise in the particular areas they want to cut. So, for example, they want to cut transportation spending. They need to send the budget resolution to the transportation committee. Then it looks at particularly what programs within transportation should be cut. Same with defense and same with taxation. For tax matters, they would send it to the Senate Finance Committee, and in the House it's called the House Ways and Means Committee. And these committees would then look at different aspects of the tax code and decide what should be axed and what may continue, what could be reduced or what they're going to, or they could increase spending if they want to. Or they could try to increase taxes if they want to. So those are key committees. The Budget Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, and the House Ways and Means Committee are the committees that are going to control anything related to 45Q. After these substantive committees get through hearings and amendments and all this rigmarole they go through, they're going to work out detailed bills that say a line item, cut this, increase spending on this, whatever they want. And they're going to send those bills back to the Budget Committee. When it gets back to the Budget Committee, the different House and Senate Budget Committees, then they debate and vote on both the prospective amendments to these bills and also the bills themselves. And then if these bills, the House and Senate bills are not identical, which they never are, then they have to go, it's called a conference committee where they decide how to compromise between the House and Senate positions. And once the conference committee works this out, make the bills identical, then they go back to Senate House for a floor vote. Okay, a lot of rigmarole there. But some of it's useful for you. But really the issue it's going to come down to is politics and greed, right? Because you have to get a majority of senators and representatives agreeing that a budget resolution should be passed. And they all got special interests that they cater to, and all their donors and whatnot, and their constituents to some degree, perhaps. But they have to decide what programs are going to be cut, which programs might be increased, or how they want to handle the budget. And this, as you know, always ends up with these massive bills called omnibus bills, where they try to work out what's going to happen, what programs get axed. But the thing is that right now, as we know, the Senate and House are very nearly evenly divided between the Republicans and Democrats, the Republicans having slight majorities. That means that if a single or two or three Republicans cut and run in the Senate, and a relatively small number of Republicans in the House, say they don't want to pass this, they oppose it, then they can block movement and they'll horse trade, negotiate, and do everything else they're doing. That means that for us, if we can get a handful of people on our side on 45Q, we don't need to get them all. We don't even need to get a majority. We just need to get enough of them to force the issue into votes and to try to get 45Q in the chopping block. Because I think what the Republicans or leadership is planning to do is they don't really want to deal with 45Q because it puts two constituent groups at loggerheads. On the one hand, you've got grassroots folks, landowners who are subject to these pipelines, and folks who just simply don't agree with the 45Q program for whatever reason, of which there are large numbers in the Midwest. And then you got them on the other hand, you've got all the big special interests. But so we don't need them all. We just need some of them. Now the Senate Republican leadership has said that they want to introduce an initial budget resolution in early February. Originally, they were saying early January, but that was not likely to happen, and it didn't. The good news about that is that we have time then to start trying to influence them. And we don't need to wait until the budget resolution is introduced. You can start talking to people now. The total budget resolution process is likely to take 2 to 3 months. But this is one of the best opportunities this year to either axe or reduce the 45Q program. And even if the 45Q program were not successful this time around, if we build political power and make this an issue that's in front of them, then there'll be other future opportunities to axe it. But also we'll be able to stop the industry from trying to increase the 45Q tax credit, because the real loss here wouldn't be that it continues. The real one possible loss for us on 45Q would be that the industry comes in, the industries that want this come in and get more, ask for more money, and they get even more money to do these pipelines and increase the financial incentives for them. So, the worst case outcome is that they get more money for 45Q, and if we're not playing in it and nobody seems to care, they may very well try to, because they increase spending as well as decrease spending, they may very well try to use the budget reconciliation process to increase 45Q funding. So if we don't play, it's a greater risk that we're just going to, be in a worse situation. We have to get what we earn. So who's on the sides of this? Well, those who oppose 45Q are the number of deficit hawks of the Republican Party. There's been a number of senators and Republicans who were opposed to this as a spending program. Conservative and taxpayer groups, landowners and grassroots groups opposed to 45Q, and that includes everybody here. So who wants it? Well, I think everybody thinks it's going to be the ethanol industry, especially, but have to realize that these tax credits are going to be used by very wealthy people and corporations to not pay taxes. And so there's going to be a lobbying push probably from Wall Street and the financial districts, to get these tax credits in place. Those are the folks who are going to be the customers for the pipelines, right? The ultimate people who get the tax credits. But also project developers like Bruce Ratstetter in Iowa and Summit and all the pipelines that you're facing in Illinois and Indiana. The ethanol industry, the oil and gas industry, because of enhanced oil recovery, they want this for subsidizing the oil industry. And some Democrats and Greens want 45Q because they think it's going to help stop climate change. So those are the people that are there. But, we need to be out there moving against this. So what can you do? Well, first, you don't have to wait for the budget reconciliation bill to come out. You can start contacting your reps and senators now and contact them frequently and regularly and tell them that you want to go have them axe 45Q. It doesn't have to, through the budget reconciliation process, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. If you want to bring in arguments, that whatever arguments appeal to you or you think is going to appeal to the reps and senators, use whatever arguments you want. Ask for meetings with congressional staff and ask questions. Ask about the process. Ask them what their boss's position is. Are they going to support axing 45Q or not? And we have questions we can get you that if you'd like to pump on those. And we can help you target the senators or representatives who are on those key committees. But like I said, because everything's so balanced in Congress right now, all the representatives and senators are important on this. And if we get a number of them, even if they're not in the key committees, who are going to be vocal about opposing 45Q, then they could have an effect to force it into the chopping block and force votes on it. and make it an issue. If we don't make it into a fight, it won't ever be, we won't get anything done. We have to turn it into a fight, with a political fight, on the Hill. And what more can you do? Well, you can help get the word out to the public, through your networks, through your organizations, mainstream social media, letters to the editor, events at the senator and representatives district offices. You can have demonstrations, you can call the media, you can do op-eds, you can do all kinds of things and say, these are federal pipelines. And if we want to stop or reduce the funding for them, this is the opportunity to do it. So, it seems like this can't work, but I think you probably all know what happened in South Dakota with the vote on the incumbents there, where the folks who were supporting the 45 the CO2 pipeline industry, most of them lost their primary races, and the vote in South Dakota where they repealed the law that was against landowners, the pipeline landowners. This can happen with grassroots efforts, and frankly, we need to earn back our country by fighting hard for these kinds of, to protect our interests, because just no one else is going to do this for us. So, it has worked. It will continue to work. It's the only thing, frankly, that can work. So there's lots of things you can do. And like I said, we're setting up a listserv so that people can sign up for the listserv and then be given regular alerts, hopefully weekly alerts, about what's happening in the budget reconciliation process. The bill numbers, what the senators, representatives are saying, when they're having hearings, when they're, how to contact them and things like that. So the lobbyists who work within DC can tell you what's going on, and you can keep up to speed with all that stuff and what's happening. And I'd like to then, close by saying that in my estimation, political power, the formula is pretty simple. It's the numbers in a democracy anyway, and it's the numbers of people, time, intensity. It's not just about doing the easy thing, sending them an email or getting on their forum and saying once, please ax 45Q. If you did it multiple times a week or even multiple times a day, or got a bunch of your friends to do it and had them do it repeatedly over the course of time, keep it on their radar. The more pressure they get, the more interest they have from people. The sheer number of folks and the amount of effort they make is going to tell them whether their constituents care about this or not. So don't be afraid to be a pest and to push them and to keep pushing them, and let them know that there'll be political consequences if they vote against everyday people in their constituency. And finally, I wanted to thank you again for being here tonight. It's my part of my family background is Swedish, so I thought, Inner Viking can come out sometimes, and we need to practice together to get the 45Q on the chopping block. So anyway, thanks for your time today, and I will figure out how to stop sharing, and happy to answer any questions. So we're done sharing now. Everybody can see the regular screen.
Yes, we can. If you can see you too. We do have some questions in the chat. And Carolyn, I would like to invite you to talk a little bit about the CCS Action Network too as we move forward, if you feel that is okay to do. I happened to miss a call yesterday, of course. One of the things I can't do is tell time, and I was off by a whole full hour, so I missed the call. Uh, but let's go for questions with Paul first. And Mary, you had a question in the chat, and those of you who want to put your questions in the chat or just raise your hands, that's how we do that here, and I'll make sure that you get recognized. And you're not a quiet group, I know that already. Mary, let's start with you and your question.
Yes. Thank you, Paul, for this wonderful presentation. I understand that Ro Khanna has introduced a bill that would eliminate the 45Q tax credit for CCS projects that are for enhanced oil recovery. Is there any chance in hell that that bill could move or pass?
Well, it's hard to say, but I mean, we have to introduce them to try to get it to pass. The other thing we can do, and I'm not sure we've done this yet, is to contact Ro Khanna's office and say, see if you can ask, the budget committee in the House to include a provision that would remove enhanced oil recovery from 45Q, because frankly, that's likely to be the majority of money is going into enhanced oil recovery efforts. So this is a major subsidy for the oil industry. And if enhanced oil recovery was removed from the 45Q statute, that would reduce the amount of its use and save probably billions and billions of dollars in the federal budget over time. So I think that could be considered budget related, and we have to see if Ro Khanna would work with his leadership to get the EOR, the exclusion in the budget reconciliation bill.
He has not introduced it yet. We're talking to Ro Khanna, hoping that he'll introduce it soon.
So Carolyn, would you mind introducing yourself to I don't think you've joined us before. Carolyn is the executive director of the Science and Environmental Health Network and another wonderful person that you all need to get to know. So, do you want to say any little bit more about who you are and how you fit into the movement here?
I get to work with so many fabulous people. I help coordinate something called the CO2 plenary, and many of you are probably on that listserv. I recognize some of you, and we've been tackling carbon capture and storage from lots of angles. And I've worked with Pam and Lan and Paul and others with the implications for the Army Corps of Engineers permits for crossing waterways and rivers, and the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, and how they're actually setting standards, safety standards for pipelines. So there are lots of ways, by the way, that this budget reconciliation can actually affect carbon capture and storage. The 45Q is the big elephant in the room, dare I say, elephant in the room. And if we can take out 45Q, we can do a lot. There are other aspects of money coming from Department of Energy and elsewhere that if we can stop Department of Energy loans and grants for hydrogen and carbon capture and storage, there are a lot of ways that we can work with this. And so if you join this action network, you will get lots of information about money. I think the key here is that Congress, in its infinite lack of wisdom, decided to make climate policy tax policy. And they're throwing so much money at this in so many ways, and it's only going to keep the fossil fuel industry alive. So I think that the Action Network is a place to figure out how the public purse is being used to undermine our public health, our environment, and it's unjust. And I want to add one other thing about things that you can talk to your Congress folk about with this, and that is to tie in your concerns about water. There are a lot of other things that are going to be happening in Congress that we're going to be hearing about. Mr. Zeldin, who's going to be, who has been nominated for the Environmental Protection Agency, confirmation hearing is this coming week. And if your leaders can hear, your senators can hear that you have concerns about water and EPA's ability to adequately regulate water with carbon capture and storage, given ADM, given the mechanical failure of Texas EOR wells, then we're going to be able to come at this from many, many sides. And that's why we're joining together in this action network. First of all, to leverage our power with 45Q, but then to not let any of these other really critical issues like water or like the loans and grants for hydrogen and other things go by the wayside.
That was excellent. So I keep putting, and I will continue to populate the chat with the link. And it was in the email that, to join the CCS Action Network. It was also in the email that you all received. And I'll make sure as I send it out, another email after this call with the recording, that you get it again. Because again, I think building power together is what it's all about. And we can certainly all take some time to do this. So thank you, Carolyn. And we do have we have a whole list of questions here that are coming in, which is great. Um, okay, so I'm going to just go down the list here. Leslie, Susan, I think you are after Mary. Do you want to ask your question about 45Q?
Sure. I just wondered if Paul or somebody could communicate whether 45Q also covers other initiatives such as solar and wind. Do we need to be very specific on the CCS ask?
The 45Q tax credit applies only to CCS. It doesn't apply to wind and solar. Now, there are other provisions within the tax code that provide tax credits for wind and solar, and likely those will be attacked by certain members of Congress. But the 45Q tax credit is specific exclusively to carbon capture and storage. And so you don't have to worry about, if you say 45Q, you're not going to be taking out wind and solar. But just be aware that other entities will be trying to get rid of the wind and solar tax credits through this process. And I mean, and you could also say, I oppose 45Q, but I support, wind and solar support wind and solar, federal government support for wind and solar power. You can say both.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I was going to point this out, but Leslie, you are meeting with Darren LaHood tomorrow, who happens to be in the House Ways and Means Committee. Why don't you ask your question and see if we get an answer about what you're asking, wherever
Well, I
you.
was just wondering, I heard Paul say that he had a list of questions we could possibly ask our legislators. And I wondered where I could find those. I don't know if I'm going to get to talk much tomorrow. There's 4 counties going to be represented and we only have 45 minutes. There's 7 people already lined up to talk. But I can add to that if I have some more specific questions than just what I have in my head.
Yeah, I put just 3 questions in there. I don't think they need to get very detailed. I think asking about the process, asking about the representative's role in this and how active he intends to be in the budget reconciliation process, and asking him what his position on the 45Q tax credits are, whether he would support, including them in the reconciliation bill in terms of putting them on a chopping block. Because it has to be that somebody has to put in the bill that the 45Q tax credit is stricken from law. Ask him whether he'd support that or not. And then, ask him also to provide you with regular updates. I would suggest, if you have time, going to his website, seeing if any of his press or searching his website through the search functions and seeing if he's ever talked about 45Q. I did the same thing for Chuck Grassley and his web and his press, his stuff. And it's 45Q. It's an easy search term. Just, search for 45Q. It only can mean this tax credit. And if you search for the websites and there's nothing in the 45Q, you can just tell them, I didn't see any position statement on 45Q. What's your position? Would you support it, getting rid of it? And, see what he says.
Okay. That I can do. I have time tomorrow morning to go to his website. That'll be great.
So,
Thank you.
So Leslie, help me understand again. You're meeting with him. This is a meeting you scheduled?
It's scheduled, somebody from Henry County scheduled it and invited me to go along to represent Stark County. But I think there was 4 counties involved. I don't know the other 2 other than Henry and Stark.
And the purpose of the meeting, just curiously?
Well, it's not only for CO2, but for the wells, water, wind. They were gonna see, it's pretty broad what they told me they're gonna be presenting. So wind, water, CO2 pipelines, CO2 wells. And I was unable to meet with them Tuesday afternoon to see what it was all about, all their agenda, but that's what I understand it's about.
Well, thank you for doing this, and you're right there at the very beginning of this too. So if you wouldn't mind, if you can return next week and give us kind of a little bit of a debrief to see how your meeting went and what kind of response he had, that would be great.
Okay,
His
sure.
his district does include One Earth Sequestration LLC and the pipeline there. So,
Okay,
yeah, and if you want have any more information about that, give me a ring tomorrow morning or not. We can talk about that later. But just know he's right there with One Earth. So
okay.
One Earth is there with him, I guess I should say. Okay, that'd be interesting to see what he says.
All right.
All right. Shelley has a question here. And by the way, Paul's comments and response is in the chat. If you scroll down, folks, you'll see what Paul just relayed to Leslie. Okay, Shelley. Which I don't know if you're here, 2 pages here. Shelley, do you want to ask your question? You think you probably do. She's still here, or did we lose her? Shelley's question. There.
You can just read it and I'll answer it.
Yeah. How can a US citizen find out what companies are receiving these credits based on tax dollars?
Well, the answer to that is that you can't. The tax credits are part of federal tax returns, the tax credit claims. And under federal tax law, tax returns are confidential. And there are exceptions to that, but there's no exception for 45Q. That means that nobody can see who's getting these tax credits other than, confidential people at the IRS. But even they're not going to do any, lists or summary of that. So when you go talk to representatives and senators, you can say that one of the problems with the 45Q tax credit is that none of us knows who's going to get it. This is money given away, completely blank check in terms of who even gets it. And so one of the things that might be able to be included in the reconciliation bill would be provisions that would reduce fraud and reduce the potential for fraud. And one of the ways of doing that is by making the 45Q tax credit information public. There's no God-given right that 45Q tax information has to be confidential. But since it is essentially a grant program by other means, if this was a regular grant program, then we'd know who is getting the grants. But because it's done as a tax credit, which is one of the problems of tax credits, it's all secret who gets it. And so, when you go talk to senators or representatives, say one of the things we want you to do is to increase the anti-fraud provisions, and one of those is by just making this public. If we're going to give these companies and corporations billions and billions of dollars, we should know who's getting it, how much they're getting, because otherwise it's just a secret giveaway to insiders, and we don't approve of that. So that's the answer. We can't know who gets them. And that law needs to change. I believe it's 26 USC 6103, something like that. Anyway, I can look it up.
Thanks, Paul. Shelley, do you have a follow-up to that? Or are you still having trouble getting off mute?
No, he answered it. It just boggles my mind that there's no accountability. There's no accountability. So it's amazing to me.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment. I think many of us would agree with that. Let's go maybe to Susan and Rick and then back to Susan Stroll, if that sounds okay. Susan Thomas, you first.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. In terms of what we do know in Indiana, I'm with Just Transition Northwest Indiana. And we do know BP here in Whiting is going to be a huge recipient of the 45Q benefits. And I am sure you're all aware and have heard the December 26th, BP had a massive, they're not saying it's massive, but they had a benzene leak that was so bad that people left town and foliage died and people were going to the hospital. And it's been in the news all week. In fact, our organizing director, Lisa Valley, was on with Mike Puente on WBEZ today talking about it. So one of our big pushes, this is not specifically 45Q, but we're encouraging everyone to mention the horrible track record that BP has in terms of safety and transparency in communication with communities and emergency preparedness. It is just the same old, same old. And how is this going to impact these communities, these pipeline communities, if, God forbid, there is a rupture? We know exactly how BP is going to handle it, and the city of Whiting, and the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and on and on. So we are really encouraging folks in your communications to emphasize the public health and public safety and emergency preparedness aspect of this. And if you can plug that anywhere into your argument, on chopping away at the 45Q, I think it is worthwhile to do so. Thank you.
And Susan, thank you for being here. I think we are as a coalition to stop CO2 pipelines and Just Transition Northwest Indiana are looking to get to find ways to work more closely together. We're neighbors, so
Oh, absolutely. We
yeah,
have the
we're neighbors.
same. Yeah, and I can't leave without giving a plug to our event. We're hosting a webinar next week, and I can share that with you, Pam. I think it's Thursday the 16th.
I do have it, and I'll tell you what, I'll put that in our email that I send out tomorrow with the recording here.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the work that you're doing, and you're doing a great job organizing. And
Thank you.
yeah, we just need to keep working together. Okay, Rick.
Thank you. Again, thanks, Paul. Great job. As I recall, 45Q is based on tons of CO2 sequestered and doesn't really care where it comes from. Is that correct? So if you get your CO2 from a cement factory or a fertilizer factory or a steel mill, you're still qualified for 45Q if you can sequester the CO2?
Yeah, it can be from any US source. So, for example, if it was a Canadian company, pumping CO2 underground in the US across the border, they wouldn't get the tax credit, but any US carbon emitter would apply as long as it's larger than, I think, 12,500 tons a year, which is very small amounts, relatively speaking. So, yeah, all
what
those
concerns me is that there are these industries I just mentioned really have no other way of reducing their CO2 output to the atmosphere.
Right.
And I'm wondering if it will actually help us if we say only exclude it for ethanol, let's say, and allow it to continue for these three industries.
One of the things that the green community always says is that carbon capture and storage is necessary for what they call hard nut industries, which are steel and cement primarily, where they have to use the fossil fuels not for heat, but for chemical processes. And the problem is that capturing carbon at those facilities is so expensive that the current tax credit probably is not sufficient to support capture at steel and cement plants. But it is way more than is needed to support carbon capture at ethanol plants. So you're right, Rick. If we limited the 45Q tax credit to just these, quote, hard nut industries, which is what the Greens all say should be focused on, that's in the US, that's about 0.5% of US emissions is from steel, and 0.5% is from cement production. And globally, it's different, but in the US, they're not big. So that means that we basically if it was limited to cement and steel, it would axe the 45Q tax credit by about 99%.
I think it might enhance our credibility if we say, look, we're not against CCS as a whole. It's just that it's not solving any real solutions when you use it for ethanol or some of these other things.
So that's one way to approach it, and to say, would you to your representative, would you consider limiting it to these pieces, because that's what the environmental community is everybody's saying who supports carbon capture and storage, that it should be for these hard net industries. And if we focused all of our money just on those industries, they could afford to do it.
Yeah.
First off, right now, because you could raise tax credit just for them, and they could afford to do it, and it would again keep other industries that should just be phased out or shouldn't deserve a subsidy in the first place, from using the tax credit.
Now, aviation is another one that's extremely hard to crack. And so the production of SAF potentially could be another one for which 45Q could be permitted.
It could be, but there's also, I believe, a separate tax credit for sustainable aviation fuel, and they shouldn't be double dipping.
Okay.
And it would be better rather than having it be both. It should be one or the other. And since there's one tax credit specifically for sustainable aviation fuel, that I think should be it, rather than having them also join in the carbon capture piece, which is sort of a direct way of supporting. And again, the federal government, rather than using a tax credit structure for these, could use a grant program structure, funding structure, and then it would be all in the up and up of who's getting it and why. The reason it's tax credit is so they can sneak it in.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for that answer. And that would be a whole interesting discussion about those other industries, maybe at a later time. All right, so let's do this. Susan from Indiana, and then let's see who's after you, Susan, and Jenny, and then Kathy.
Hi, guys. Thanks, Paul, for all the information on the 45Q. I appreciate it because, boy, that is very, very in-depth. I've tried to read it on my own, but yeah, it's a lot. Two things. One is, I think our rep, Todd Young, sits on one of those key committees, and I didn't know if there's anything specifically I should be talking to him about. A better way of saying something than just, hey, I think these are bad ideas. There's going to be a lot of fraud. Something specifically that might prompt him. But I do know that the company that we're fighting here in Vigo County, Wabash Valley Resources, he has taken money from them through campaign donations. So I think he probably is supportive of it. But yeah, I just didn't know how to approach that and what specific I could ask him if he's on the committee.
I guess I would suggest starting with asking some questions. For example, who is his staff? Figuring out who his staff is working on this, both in your district office and in DC. Ask about what his role is, and just don't assume that, because the committee assignments are being made now. Ask him what his priorities are going to be, to see what he seems to care about, and then you could ultimately ask him about his position on 45Q and see if he gives you a straight answer or not. And I wouldn't worry, at least in the first communications, about asserting your position. You could do that, certainly, but it might be better to gather as much information as you can and have a nice conversation with the staff and figure out where they're coming from. And then once you do that, we can come back and report back on what he's saying, and then we can talk about specific questions, how to push him on that. Because, like I said, most of them want to give money to their donor class, and so they're going to support this. And that's going to be, we should assume that's what almost all these folks are going to say. But, once we figure that out, what the position is, then we can start laying pressure on them politically based on what their justification for supporting 45Q is. If they say it's for ethanol, they say it for local development, they say whatever it is, then you can start pushing them on whether it really is a good use of federal dollars, whether it makes any sense, whether it's something that it should be, the risk of fraud is really high, that it's all going to be secret, that all the different, there's no tracking of it, there's no regulation, meaningful regulation law. The IRS has very limited enforcement authority, and there's been prior fraud in this program. And what is he going to do about that? So I think that once you get those first questions answered, then we can regroup and figure out, what the play is. So, first it's reconnaissance. And then you can go back and just keep asking him every week. So you're going to make up new questions and ask him new things and just keep pestering him on it.
Okay, that sounds good.
I
Yeah,
want to add one other thing to that, and that is that if they are absolutely resistant to eliminating 45Q, you can pose it for getting rid of EOR. You can say, will you cap it at the original budget estimate for 45Q? Now there doesn't appear to be a cap. So there are a lot of ways that we can keep going at this and coming at people who are in favor of 45Q, but may appreciate some guardrails on it. So, we want to get rid of it first. That's the main objective. But then there are lots of other things that we can go, okay, well, you're not going to, would you do this? Would you do that? Would you take away the secret, that it's secret? Would you, so we can keep coming back with lots of proposals, and eventually, we'll get one that they'll agree to, or several.
thank you,
Yeah, I mean,
Caroline.
By the way,
like I said, the fact we don't know who gets the money and the fact that there's no cap in the program means that it's a blank check, not only in terms of the amount, but who gets it. It's like, just here's some federal dollars, do what you want. Is that really something that any, budget deficit or budget hawk, deficit hawk should be supporting? Are you supporting a blank check, no limits in this program, and we don't even know who gets it, really? I mean, but again, figure out where they're coming from, and then we can tailor the questions
Yeah.
and the
Okay.
arguments.
Yeah, I'll find out. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go at him hard right now because I want to, but I know that I shouldn't. But yeah, I may seek your help too once I find out where they stand to get some better questions. But one more thing for this company, they've got a conditional loan guarantee right now. Of course, we tried to find out what those conditions are, and they will not reveal them. The DOE wouldn't even reveal those conditions or what's the requirements that they've got to meet, but it's for $1.59 billion. Can we ask for things like that to, I don't know, be pulled back? I mean, or will they be pulled back if they're already like in a guarantee state? I mean, they haven't gotten the money because they haven't met some requirements, but
Yeah, I don't know exactly what point they can pull back a federal grant or loan guarantee, but I think that you can go in and just say, in addition to the 45Q tax credit, would you be interested, what's your position on removing the grant programs through the Department of Energy for carbon capture and storage and pipelines and whatnot, and the loan programs too, because you may not be able to roll back this loan program, but you could stop in the future, and they may very well, screw this loan up, the company, and have to go back to the well at some point, and if the well is dry, then you've helped to stop the loan and grant programs as well.
all right, thank you.
So this kind of raises a question that I have. I mean, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously. You, Paul, and you, Caroline, are welcome to join us anytime. But in the absence of having you here every week, and as folks begin to have experiences, how best do we want to be able to communicate that to you? I mean, we could do this as part of the CCS Action Network, and I can report back, and then we can come up with a series of responses. Or we can wait till we have a critical mass of, gee, we've heard all this, and now what do we do? And then invite you back. Maybe it's a both and. What are your thoughts there? Because there's going to be a lot of individual, which I think is great. I think it's just absolutely great that people on this call are already beginning the process of setting up meetings and getting ready to move forward with this. But they're going to have individualized responses and questions. And where do we go next? How do we handle part of it?
I would suggest, and Carolyn may have a different idea about this, I would suggest that, we set up the steering committee for the budget reconciliation process and you're on that. That the people in the states report back in that meeting structure.
Okay.
As well as to your own folks. I mean, of course, communicate with your own folks, whatever you want to communicate, but I think that in terms of the national coordination, it would be effective if you use that structure to report back. Because ultimately, if this is going to work, we have to multiply and conquer, and having there be greater structures and stronger political structures and more political power built at a state level is going to be more effective than trying to run it all through a centralized structure.
Okay, as long as I remember it's 2 p.m. Eastern time, we're good with that. So, and I was an hour off, as I said. Okay, that sounds like a great plan. Rick, do you have something that goes along with this topic? Because we've got other people ahead of you, or how do you want to handle this? Do you have a follow-up?
I was going to follow on the point that Robert Watts put in the chat there about the traceability and of these credits. As I understand it, that someone who gets a credit can split it up and sell it to 100 other people, and there's no way of balancing what they claim, or in fact, someone could make it up entirely and claim they bought a credit, and you can't tie it back to how many credits the original company was owed or owned. So it's just further difficulty in tracing it. Is that correct?
Yeah, the tax credits can be transferred in two ways. They can be transferred from the capture. The credits are generated by initially given to the owners of the capture equipment specifically. And that capture equipment can be owned by multiple individuals or corporations or joint ventures or partnerships or whatever. So you could have hundreds of people owning capture equipment. They can transfer the tax credits to sequestration and enhanced oil recovery well permit holders. So that's one way they can do it. It can go to the people that put the CO2 underground, and that transfer can be done in whatever terms they want. It can be paid in cash, or it could be other kinds of compensation for those tax credits.
And they put them on eBay and just sell them to anybody who would like to have a tax credit.
And then you could also, the other way they can be transferred is they can be sold once to anybody who wants them. The tax credits from a facility in Illinois could be bought by anybody with a tax liability in the United States that wants to use them. But again, that's only people who have a tax liability and a substantial tax liability at that. So, poor people aren't going to be able to use them. Most middle income people aren't going to be able to use them. And it's probably going to be relatively complex to get into those purchase option structures to buy tax credits. So yeah, they can be bought and sold, but just once. So the carbon capture facility or a sequestration or enhanced oil recovery could transfer their tax credits to one other person. That person cannot then resell them. That being said, I'm sure, Rick, you understand that there's ways of having options and owning the capture equipment, and it could be transferred not only to multiple individuals, it could be transferred during the course of a year. So you could buy a capture facility for part of the year and get the carbon dioxide for part of the year. So there's ways that the big corporate folks can spread these tax credits all over the place. Practically they can get them to whoever wants them, but there are rules that they have to follow.
What's to prevent someone just making up out of thin air a tax credit and putting it on their tax return? How would you trace it back to any other source of the?
Well, that's one of the things that we can help people understand is that that we have a proposal to be able to track these tax credits from what we call from cradle to grave, and meaning that there needs to be a way to track the tax credit both in terms of monetary transactions, but also in terms of physical transactions. Yeah. So, we need to be able to track and have recorded equipment, metering equipment that records how much carbon is captured at a facility, and then how much, assuming the tax credit exists, and then where it goes in pipeline systems through pipeline networks, chain of custody to enhanced oil recovery or sequestration site. and then there'd be media's recording where it goes, and all that stuff should be tracked by somebody. It can't be the IRS because the IRS doesn't do sciencey stuff. Probably have to be the EPA, but then the IRS should also require reporting of all these the transactions that happen during that time, including futures transactions, because they could do futures on this stuff, right? And and so they should be recording the financial transactions. Now, right now, to do the claim, you have to submit some of that detailed transactional information in what are called template. Well, what are they? Anyway, they're template reports. But the problem is that they're not standardized report structures, and so they're not computer scannable forms. Like our tax forms are computer scannable. You send your paper tax form to the IRS, they put it in a scanner, and it just takes all the numbers in and sucks it all in. And that means that they can get the data collected into a structured data set. But the reporting they have right now for the 45Q in detail is just on whatever form they want to use it. They have to provide certain information, but there's no format, there's no approved form. So that means for the IRS to go back and analyze any of the data for who's claiming that how these transactions work, they'd have to go pull that paper copy or the PDF copy and manually input all that data. And you're right, there's no way to track it right now that, with the potentially for tens of, even hundreds of thousands of tax credit claimants, transferring them back and forth with each other. How in the world is the IRS, going to be able to track who's using tax credits? And again, with no physical tracking, like right now, there's no physical tracking of CO2. There's an incentive for everybody to say they're putting more CO2 in the system than otherwise, because if they cheat in terms of how much CO2 they say they're capturing, then everybody down the line makes money. Nobody gets the short end of that stick except for the federal government.
I recall when they used this for EOR, they went back and analyzed it after the fact and found there were billions of dollars of mistakes, false claims, and so on, even at the $20 a ton level.
Yeah. Without any physical tracking, they could just say we captured more. They could lie, and how's the IRS ever going to know, or the EPA ever going to know if there's no data recording? They won't.
I think there are 2 points about this. One is that this is ripe for fraud. This is ripe for financial fraud. It's also ripe for climate fraud for both of the reasons that Paul pointed out, that there is no actual cradle to grave tracking of the CO2, and there's no real way of verifying, monitoring and verifying the credits. And the second point that I want to make is that there is a vast economic infrastructure being built on the back of 45Q. Futures, derivatives, a whole lot of people trading money back and forth on the back of 45Q. And it's an infrastructure that we've tried to get a handle on, and it is very difficult because of the numerous ways of making money, with this essentially program that builds in scams. It just builds them in. With the lack of any kind of accountability that the public will never know.
Perfect for the Trump administration.
Well, yeah. Well, I think that was a super in-depth response, and I do think that's something we all need to keep in mind as we go forward. And I would also say that there's a lot here that's probably new to many of us on this call, and it's okay if you're hearing some of this for the first time or being encouraged to think about things maybe in a bit of a different way than you have thought about it before. That's just fine. And the more we talk about it together and the more we act together, the more I think we all understand, have a common understanding and also a common language. So that's going to happen as we move forward.
Answer a few more from Ken.
Yeah, I do. I want to call on Jenny. Jenny.
Right, thank you. I'm a resident of Urbana, Illinois, and really, Carolyn, hearing your description of this makes me just want to go take a shower. It's filthy, it's true. But my question is real easy. As a resident of Urbana, Illinois, I'm thinking, but I don't know, that my lobbying time and effort might be better spent on my member of Congress, Nikki Budzinski, as opposed to on my U.S. senators. Tammy Baldwin, excuse me, not Baldwin,
Duckworth.
Tammy Duckworth. I love Tammy Baldwin too, but my senator is Tammy Duckworth and my other US senator is Dick Durbin. Do you know the positions of Durbin and Duckworth?
No, we haven't done any of that kind of research
Okay.
yet. And that's one of the
Okay.
reasons we're asking people to ask questions. So even though you might not think they're going to do anything, it would be helpful to us to, contact them and ask the
All
questions.
right. I have received, you've given me an assignment. I accept it.
Thank
We'll
you.
do, and
We'll
we'll
follow
report
through.
back.
I know you well enough to be able to do that. And
Okay.
many of us have gotten all these form letters from Dick Durbin and had met with Dick Durbin and we met with Duckworth and our meetings have not been overly promising. But again, you keep going at this and over and over and over again. And this is another way of framing the concerns, I think, than we've done before in our meetings. So thanks for the question, Jenny. Kathy, how about you and then Lan?
Sure. Yeah, we have certainly met with Durbin, Duckworth. They're very, very supportive of CCS. We didn't, and Bazinski. I've talked to her in person and we've had a call with her. She's very pro CCS. She's a young Democratic. I even talked to her after ADM and she said, oh, well, they can just fix it. Yeah. So, but that doesn't mean that we're going to give up. But going forward to try to put changing hearts and minds, whatever we're going to try to do here. A couple questions. We have had certainly some success, in our interventions with the ICC, et cetera, getting opposition letters from townships, from counties, for specific pipelines, of course. But how influential would that be, knowing that our senators, the senators and my representative are pro CCS, to start getting perhaps some letters or resolutions specifically on this topic to ask them to get rid of the 45Q. Now, I realize usually you use that at the state level, but I wonder, could we do that? Is that a reasonable approach to take? And since we have had success and we already have them educated on the issue. And then the other issue is, I know we're talking about a blank check, but do we have a guesstimate of, if we say how much money could be saved in the budget if they eliminated 45Q? What kind of dollar figures are we talking about?
Well, taking your first question about whether it's good to get counties and municipalities and townships and everybody on, absolutely, it's a good way to do that. And, and not, they may or may not care about some of those constituencies because they may not see it as their core constituency. I mean, a lot of Democrats support CCS because of the unions, frankly. And to a degree because of some of the climate change stuff that some of the Greens claim on CCS. But that doesn't mean it's that getting counties and municipalities do it is not helpful. In fact, it's a way of educating the counties and municipalities and people throughout them in understanding the 45Q tax credit and why it's unjust, why it's unfair, why it's ripe for fraud and all those kinds of things. We just have to spread the word to more people, and doing those kinds of efforts with counties and municipalities is a great way of educating dozens or even hundreds of more people, especially if you can get them press on it. If they pass something, you get press on it and people can say, what's this 45Q thing? And then, because it seems very arcane, but once people get that this is a big giveaway of billions of dollars. And then speaking of the amount of money, we'll be trying to figure that out with IEFA, which is one of the groups we work with in terms of the potential dollars for 45Q. Originally, the different estimates would be like $1 billion or $2 or $3 billion, it's like $3 billion. But I mean, just the Summit pipeline alone would be, I think, over $2 billion a year. And so that, if you're going to make a effect on climate change, you should be able to figure out how much, with a certain amount of carbon they're planning to capture, that can be equated to dollars. And to make a difference in climate change, you're not talking about tens of billions of dollars. You're probably talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. So hopefully we'll work out some numbers for you on that. We don't have them right now. But we do need to figure out what those numbers are so we understand the potential budget impacts of cutting or reducing, capping the 45Q tax credit.
Well, I
I
know
think that
that sorry, Governor Burgum of North Dakota, who's now, of course, set to be Secretary of the Interior, said that in North Dakota alone, this would bring in $70 billion just in tax dollars to North Dakota, I think over a period of 10 years, if I recall correctly. But I know the 70 billion, and that was just the tax cut to the state of North Dakota. So I was just wondering what the overall cost is going to be on this.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
if you want to answer that, but I want to come back to the state and local.
Yeah, we'll figure out the total amount of, the range of estimates because nobody really knows what it's going to be in the future. And that's one of the problems is that it's a blank check. We don't really know how much, there's no cap on it, there's no controls, and there's no ability to know who gets it or what the flow is. Nobody knows what the budget cost is going to be. But if it was going to make an effect on climate change, it would have to be hundreds of billions of dollars just in terms of to make the tonnage be high enough to make a difference.
I'm just afraid that industry will try to tell the budget reconciliation process, oh, it really won't cost them all that much, and then tap in for hundreds of billions.
So I wanted to say one thing about having local officials actually weigh in on 45Q. The cost of these projects to local communities is going to be huge. It could be in terms of increased rates for electricity or power. So, if you can say, if we don't have this project, we're going to have power available for our community. And you can talk about the impact on water, that these projects are going to have vast impacts on water quantity, especially, and the ADM and others on water quality. So going at it that way and saying 45Q is going to impose this enormous burden on our local communities in terms of rates, electric power rates, and water. And if you cut 45Q, we won't have to pay that. So I think in terms of some of the Democrats who are concerned about the bread and butter issues, focusing on what these other costs that will be incurred by local communities could be of benefit.
Because I have certainly talked to them about the cost to us to, intervene at the ICC and to fight all this. It's been very expensive for us here, but I just don't know how much they care about that. But the other costs for water and power for all the citizens, that's a good argument. Thank you.
It's a great argument, and it's something we're already talking about, right?
Yes.
So this is a great suggestion, Carolyn. I think we can easily put that one to work right away. So, Lan.
Yeah, I had a question, and I don't know, maybe in the interest of time, could do this offline with Paul, but I had a quick technical question. You spoke about and something I'd never really thought about in detail. You spoke about the capture facility, say the ethanol plant, getting the 45Q money. It's in my thought process, it's not captured until it's and completely processed till it's stored. So how does that money get distributed? How does it get how is it metered and how the CO2 and how is it the money get distributed, say, to the sequestration company, the pipeline company versus the ethanol plant?
Yeah, I should have made it clear. To get the tax credit, they have to do two things. They have to capture it, and it's the owners of the capture equipment that get the tax credit initially, and they have to contract to have it be stored or put underground. Now, if it's contracted and they can in fact claim and then it's actually not stored, put underground, there's a way called clawing back to get, in theory, to get money back, to tax credits back, but that whole clawback structure is really not well understood and not well developed. And especially if you had hundreds or thousands of tax credit claimants where they're distributed out through all these networks. And then it turns out, oopsie, we didn't put as much CO2 underground as we thought. How are you going to tell all those folks? How are you going to split up the cost? Is it going to be pro rata? And how are you going to figure out who got them? Because the IRS is going to have all this paperwork in PDF form, non-standardized reporting, how are they going to identify potentially thousands of different people that should have part of their tax credit clawed back? I just don't think it's physically possible, for them to do that. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just not clear how I don't think they can enforce this in any meaningful way.
Would it actually be measured at the facility, the capture facility? Because there could be many ethanol plants, many other facilities along a long pipeline, and I never thought about the details of that or understood how it's measured, and then of course how it's compensated through the 45Q.
Right. There's a federal EPA program where in theory they report how much they capture and then how much, and they modified their regulations recently to then report the gross amount of how much they capture and where that CO2 goes to facilities for the entire year. That's not on a tax credit basis, meaning it's not broken up by who gets the tax credits. That's just the gross amount. So but again, there's no metering required. There's no management. There's no ongoing recording devices required for any of this. So assuming that data is correct, which is a big assumption because it's going to be easily falsified, if it's correct, then the most that the EPA could do is look, the IRS could figure out how much total tonnage came from a facility by taking all those forms and trying to figure out by hand. And then the EPA could compare that to the EPA's numbers. And if it would seem like it was a lot, then they could say, oh, there's fraud here. But there'd be no way for them to tell who committed fraud, who benefited, and how to claw back that money. It's just, I don't think it'd be practically possible for them to do that. So it really is a blank, unregulated check in many, many different ways.
Thank you.
So we are over time as per usual. And Mary, maybe we can get Carolyn to weigh in on the local impact on communities again, if she would be willing to do that. And if you would, Carolyn, let's start with that, and then I want to close this out, and I want to issue a challenge to all of us.
You want me to talk about the local
Yeah.
costs?
The local cost again, yeah. That's what I'm hearing Mary ask.
I think that there are the two main costs that I would raise with local officials because they have jurisdiction over usually power. So my town, has an electric utility, and the county is going to have a carbon capture facility in my county, and we're going to have to increase our electric production, the production of electricity, and the ratepayers are going to be charged for the new equipment, that kind of thing. And then you look at the costs in terms of water. So we've done some estimates of water for various plants, the consumption that will be needed. Those numbers are pretty, as variable as the numbers for 45Q. But if you live in a town where you have water pressure in a drought or other occasions, then these vast facilities, which are only paid for by 45Q, and they're going to be sucking up all of your water, that is the cost that your local officials need to account for. And if you can tie it directly to 45Q and say, but for 45Q, we would still have enough water. We would not have our electric rates raised, but for this project, which we are also paying for with a lower federal budget because you're taking our tax money and you're giving them the benefit. We are paying the polluter, and then we have to pay in terms of increased electric rates, increased water costs and shortages during droughts, during the hot weather, those sorts of things. So those are the two things that I think are most relevant for local officials in terms of local costs. Paul may have additional ideas about that.
Yeah, I think the no all risk, no reward approach that was used for some of the oil pipelines actually works pretty well here as well. Because ultimately emergency response for these pipelines is going to be, at the cost of the counties unless there's a ordinances passed to get the companies to pay for that. Both emergency response to capture facilities as well as to pipelines. There's the risk to the citizens of a rupture of the pipelines, and that the emergency response planning for that for citizens and citizen preparation of their own way is a burden on the citizens who have to deal with it. And in terms of long-term benefits, especially in Illinois, my understanding, I can double check this, is that Illinois, maybe Rick knows about this more than I do, but is that Illinois has very low tax rates for pipelines compared to other states. And the amount of tax benefit that comes in from pipelines in Illinois is pretty de minimis. And that means that, and the jobs are going to be from out of area, for the most part, out of area construction companies. They're not going to be that many local jobs. They're going to be relatively short term in any given county. There'll be some short term economic hit from maybe some workers coming in buying gas and and corn chips and pork rinds and whatever at the 7-Eleven. But once that's all done, then there's no permanent jobs in the county. There's no permanent benefit, and the tax benefits are very low. But at the same time, the county's going to have to deal with emergency response costs, and people are going to be faced with the substantial potential losses if there's a rupture to their well-being, their livelihoods, and their health and their lives. So and then there's also the cost to the farmers and other landowners whose land is adversely affected and whose businesses are adversely affected by the pipelines. So, it's all risk, all damage, and there's no real benefit for local folks whatsoever from any of these pipelines. So I think that's another part of it.
Thank you. And I think we've used that argument pretty successfully with the pipeline work. Rick, I think I need to close us out. Is that all right? If you have something burning to say,
Don't
we'll
worry. Yeah.
can wait. Okay, because it's already 8:26. And so I just want to honor the fact that people have stayed here a bit longer. I want to first say thank you to Paul and to Carolyn for being here and spending time with us. And also want to ask all of you if you would be willing to connect with your legislators this coming week so that we can, in fact, include as part of our next week's meeting kind of a debrief of how that went for you. And I also do want to say that if you join the CCS Action Network, okay, I'm putting this link in here again. We will be making available trainings to all who are interested that will include such things as how to work with the local media, how to write letters to the editor, how to have an in-person district meeting with with your senator or your representative. And again, this first initial action is going to be focused on budget reconciliation in 45Q. But as Carolyn said, there's a whole lot of other financial pieces that we'll be looking at in the near future. If you join, you will get information directly from the Action Network into your inbox, right? If you join and you have a group that you're working with, like Julie and Susan, for example, are working with another group called Stop CO2 Pipelines and can also share information, which I think you can also encourage people to join, but to be able to do that would be great. Same thing, we've got folks on the call here tonight who are with Citizens Against Predatory Pipelines. Again, we can take this information in and push it out with okay, I'm going to say this right, Kathy. I think Citizens Against Heartland Greenwashing Pipeline Projects. Yay! I did it because they changed their name, and I'm having trouble. So, so many of us are affiliated with other groups and encourage people to join, but also hopefully be willing to push people out so that we get more activity across the state. So I would encourage you to do that. I think I put the link in there again, didn't I?
And that link is saying you don't have permission to access this content.
I don't have the wrong link, do I? Let me try
Yes,
that
you may
again.
have.
I may have, and guess what? I don't know why, because I think I changed that.
I think one of the problems might be that this particular one is through Google, and if people don't have Google accounts, they may not be able to do it without
All right.
asking for admission to it. And I think that isn't Jim at Food and Water Watch working out how to make that process work?
Yes, we are.
Go ahead.
We're if you actually try to join the network and have trouble, you can email Pam, maybe you, and we'll get it to somebody on my staff at the Science and Environmental Health Network. And Jim and I are working on this. So,
And I did believe that I took that and corrected the link for the email that I sent out. So let me say this. I will send the recording tonight to everybody tomorrow with the corrected link so that you can easily join. So I promise I can do that. So it looks like this may be working now. But okay, so thank you, Rick, for sharing that. So so the point is, let's do it, right? Let's do it. Let's do that initial fact-finding work. As we get responses from our elected officials, we can come together and craft more specific questions that may be targeted at specific individuals who we think might carry more weight in the state than others, or at least help you know what next. How do you what do you do next? You know, so in other words, we're starting with a menu of simple questions. You're opposing this, but we hope you'll move from there into doing more in-person meetings, more calls, meetings with staff as we talked to tonight, and then we can help you as you encounter the responses to figure out where to go next. That's what I'm trying to say. So two things: join, one, you'll get it in your inbox. Two, push it out to your networks as well. Ask them to join. Three, let's do this and then come back and regroup on our meeting. The next meeting is the 16th, which is 1 week from today, and we'll make sure we put this in part of our agenda items from here on out for the next couple of months. So, Paul, if
I wanted to thank everybody, but also in response briefly to Susan, we'll be trying to get out some more one-pagers on this. If anybody wants more information, if you haven't looked at it on 45Q tax credit, just search my name, Paul Blackburn of 45Q, in the blog series I did. It's not a one-pager, it's five blog series, but it does talk a lot about piggies. So, hopefully it'll be a little more interesting. But that's one place to get more information, and it usually pops up pretty high in the Google searches because it's pretty popular. So,
and it was in the email that I sent out today. So Susan, you should have had a copy of that too. And I'll send it out again because I think your blog posts are stellar. And
there's a few things that are a little bit dated, but it's still pretty much good.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And somebody had an idea here that I think is worth pursuing. A graphic, some infographics might be great. So if you in your world have some capability of thinking about how to put this down visually, that would be appreciated too. So, and some of us have that capability more, and some of us don't. But if you do, that would be kind of fun to start working with.
Some of us use crayons at best.
There you go. Susan, that's the one I sent to you earlier today. So sorry, I don't know. I picked this up from an email that obviously was incorrect. So I apologize for that. So, and I've put it out there 6 times. So thank you to Susan, and you'll get it again tomorrow. So with that, till next time, and thank you very much to our guests. And I'm sure we'll be in touch. And I think Jim has offered to come here as well in a couple of weeks, so we can talk a little bit more about specific targets and actions that might be evolving based on the whole process and where it's going and what we need to do. So thank you all very much, and have a good night and Happy New Year. And Rick, I'm glad I called on you at the end. Thank you for sharing that information about the link. And thanks all for your questions.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Carolyn. Good night, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
bye.
Thanks.